Anyone ever seen that TV show? I guess it's on a network called Comedy Central. The name of the show is South Park. It's been on TV probably for 15, close to 20 years. It's a cartoon, and some of these cartoons that are made for adults have had some real longevity. You think about, well, it's not on the air any longer, but King of the Hill, which detailed the life of a propane salesman in Texas. The Simpsons has been on the air for nearly 30 years. Doesn't that make you feel old? You've got this show. The name of it slips my mind. Family Guy. That's it, with a talking dog. But these are all, and sometimes they're not what you'd call. They don't share a reverence for tradition in this country, or for the culture that we have. And I think that yes, they can be funny at times. And I realize this TV show South Park is unsparing. It's not. They aren't what you'd call leftist, or they aren't on the right. They pretty much savage everybody in public life. Politicians, entertainers. They've made fun of Sally Struthers. They've made fun of Barbara Streisand. They had an episode the other night, season opener, I guess, where they featured Donald Trump. And Donald Trump is raped and killed before the end of the show. Now, I don't know about you, but here's a guy at the moment. He may not end up as the Republican nominee for president, and maybe not even as president. And if he doesn't get the nomination, I doubt he would be president. Still, when was the last time that someone on a TV program in the United States did a show where someone who could be in that role was actually killed violently? There was a writer at a website that I was looking at last night, and the writer happened to say this very same show backed down. They were going to do a show mocking the Prophet Muhammad a few years ago, and then Viacom, the company that runs the network, sat down with them, and they all decided we better not do that. Why? They were concerned that they would be tracked down and killed by Islamic extremists for mocking the Prophet. So they chickened out. But they feel it's okay to turn around and do a fictional show about Donald Trump being raped and killed by a school teacher. 9:36, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. And the writer of the blog post continued then at the end saying, I guess you could say that violence does work. Why? Because if a Christian came along and said, if you do this again, or if Trump came along and said, I'll have someone break your legs or kill you, apparently they would back down, as they backed down when it came to the threats from the Muslim world. So it's okay to attack people in this country, and they attack Christians. They mock Jesus on the program. They do this all the time. Why? Because they know that they can get away with it. But they don't have the courage to go out and mock people of another faith who would simply dispatch them, chop their heads off. And it tells you that right now, and a lot of people in entertainment in this country, they talk a good game, but they really don't show a good game. And speaking of violence, you keep hearing from the American left, they'll say, oh, well, violence never saved anyone or served anyone. Not true. Do you know that there's a talk show host by the name of Michael Medved? He works at a radio station in Seattle. I believe he's in syndication now, too, as well. He's a film critic who over the course of a few decades as a film critic and working in media and liberal Hollywood, had a conversion experience and became a conservative. This is happening a lot. There are a lot of people in the entertainment business you're not even hearing about. The one most recently we talked about on the program was Norman Lear, who in his early 90s has become a conservative. This is the guy who put All in the Family on the air, if you remember, and mocked Archie Bunker and other conservatives in the program. But Norman Lear is just, one of these people on a long line, and Michael Medved was one of the first I ever heard about. Medved had a great column about 10 years ago, and somebody had called him on his radio show, or on a show he was appearing on, and said, violence never solved anything. And Medved's response was, violence solved Adolf Hitler. It sure did, and it solved the Japanese in 1945. A great deal of violence. We burned down entire German cities. We irradiated a couple of cities in Japan as well as burned down several more. And you know what? They gave up. And all we can do with ISIS and Islamic extremists to say, no, don't do that. I told you, don't. Now, that's not nice. No, don't do that. Well, tell you what do you want? I'll give you this if you stop. All right, you can have nuclear weapons, but don't do that. And that's the reaction we have out of government. This country won World War II, and it stood at the apex of its power at the end of that war, and really over the next 20 years, because it was willing to do these things. And for all of the softies out there on the left, you've got to realize that there is a component of that to how you actually have a national existence. But if you go around bowing to everyone and apologizing to everyone and backing away from everyone when you set a red line, as the president did in Syria, pretty soon no one respects you. And when they don't respect you, well, they start sending submarines off your coast that could destroy our cities with their own nuclear weapons. These are the types of things that Lefty just doesn't seem to be able to process. And it's unfortunate because Democrats and liberals and their fellow traveling communists in this country simply are going to get us all killed if we don't start taking the country back away from them. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. John Boehner has resigned. It seems to me a lot of conservatives in this country are thinking that this is a really fine day. If you don't know who he is, well, why are you listening to talk radio? I've got some details on a couple of things like that related to that coming up in just a few minutes. Also, the cost of living. According to some people, we don't have inflation in this country to really speak of. A friend of mine says he's discovering otherwise. I'll tell you why in just a few minutes. Here's a question for you. The Pope is participating in an interfaith prayer service at Ground Zero. There's some other Christian leaders there. There's a rabbi. And there's an imam. Do you allow an imam to attend a service such as that? I guess that's a question that I'll throw out there. I'm not endorsing it one way or another. I've made the naughty list at the Southern Poverty Law Center. Some friends notified me about this yesterday because I've talked about some of these issues involving Islam. The Southern Poverty Law Center was founded by Morris Dees and the late Julian Bond. It is a very left-leaning organization. Now, it may have done some good in its early years, but now it's just they're knee-jerk liberals and lefties, and they're angry. They actually linked to one of my shows, a podcast or YouTube video to one of my shows, and said that I was typical of right-wing talk radio and that we're all haters in Twin Falls. Of course, nobody who actually works there has ever been here, so how would they make that judgment? And then they said I'm wrong when I point out that places like Dearborn, Michigan have Sharia law. They did not refute, though, when I mentioned the push for Sharia in places like Dallas, Houston, and Minneapolis. They did not mention that, which I also was bringing up in the very same video. I'll tell you something. Even though they don't, and they actually posted a link that comes from the government, the town government or city government in Dearborn, Michigan, saying, we do not have Sharia law. Okay, I'll tell you something. I am a Republican. Tomorrow, if I don't change my views, but I tell you I'm blue, or that I'm red, or that I'm yellow, or that I'm... what did he say? But I'm still voting for a Republican candidate. I have not changed. So you don't necessarily have to label it Sharia. In fact, if you're trying to implement it, you might not do that because you wouldn't want to attract attention. So you might call it blue, red, yellow, or... In that way, you could still put it in place and say, no, but we do not have Sharia law. Change the name, right? And you can call it whatever you like, but it's still Sharia. There have been Christians who have been arrested in Dearborn, Michigan, because they were going to street festivals, public street festivals, and as they walked down the street, they were handing out Christian pamphlets. In the United States of America, we should point out. And they have been arrested and dragged away. Now you tell me, they may not call it Sharia in Dearborn, Michigan, but what would you call it? 946, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. And I've had so many people, even here in Idaho, tell me, well, what are you people so worried about? You're just making noise and you're being blowhards. Nothing like this can ever happen here. Or it's not happening now. Well, they said that in Europe. I saw an interesting video. It was shot on the streets of Minneapolis and St. Paul, Minnesota. in the neighborhoods where you now have a lot of Somali Islamic refugees. And they were all talking in the beginning of the video, the first few minutes, about how great it was to be in the USA and how they love the liberties. But then as the interviewer started asking them questions about Sharia, they all started saying, well, yeah, it probably eventually might be a good idea here. Yeah, actually we should have it. And when somebody said to me, well, come on, they're not having terrorist training camps out there in the sagebrush, and they're not planning it out there and ready to march. Well, not today. I'm quite clear on that. But the fact of the matter is, if a culture gets to a tipping point where you now have a new dominant culture, yes, it could happen. And it is not compatible with our constitutional way of life, whether it be on the state level or on the national level. So these critics of the opposition to refugee resettlement here in Twin Falls, such as the Southern Poverty Law Center, they really should back off. They don't know the situation here, and frankly, they're among the stupid liberal club who are trying to get everyone else killed, as I mentioned before the break. 736-0300, 736-0300, Bill Colley on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. You're up next. You're on air. Good morning. All right, we're on delay. Turn down the radio and listen to the telephone.
Hello?
Hi, you're on the air. Can you go ahead?
Oh, yeah, I'm listening to your show right now, and it's talking about Somalian refugees over in Minnesota. I just got a comment. I'm originally from there. A friend of mine who I went to high school with is a woman who works in a turkey processing plant, and she works with the Somalian men. And she showed me bruises on her arms and on her legs from the abuse that she has to endure at work, not every day, but occasionally, from them grabbing her, kicking her, spitting in her face, and calling her names. And the HR won't do anything about it because the social justice warriors will come down on them and raise all kind of havoc with the company. So,
what a shock that is.
I just want you to know that I personally know this woman. I went to high school with her. And it's a shame that this is really going on in this country. People need to know this stuff.
Yeah. So, I thank you very much. It makes you wonder if it's happening on the local level. Thank you for the call. That's a question I think I've heard some answers to in the last few weeks from some people who are doing some research on this. But we wouldn't want to hurt their feelings. So we've got to change our culture and adopt theirs. And then we can all have them over to the liberal club and we can all talk about same-sex marriage. And they'll go along with it, too, you see, because we respect them and their culture. Again, if you're a Democrat in this day and age, and you support the things that you do, and you think that these people are going to get along with you, you're fools. Coming up on Mike Gallagher in just a couple of minutes, or a few seconds, brought to you exclusively by the financial advisors at Waddell & Reed in Twin Falls, 736-6563. Also wanted to mention our friends at Tint Lady of Idaho. I'll do that on the other side of Mike Gallagher. Going to be a hot one today. All the more reason to call the folks at Tint Lady of Idaho, where they can put some window tints in your home, your office, or your automobile, and they can cut down up to almost 3/4 the heat that convects through those windows. They can do a free estimate. They'll be willing to come by, and after Mike Gallagher, I'll tell you just exactly how you can get a hold of them. Just before we were listening to Mike Gallagher, I was sharing with you that the folks at Tint Lady of Idaho, and it may be the last really hot day we have of the year, but if you get window tints in place now, a couple of things can happen. Number one, you won't have to worry about that first big heat wave come next spring and summer. It'll keep your home, your business, and your automobile cool. But it will also, through the winter, it will help protect your drapes, your furniture, and your carpet from the bleaching from the sun. You can get a free estimate, and you can call and schedule an appointment today, 736-8469. Go to the website, too. We recommend that, tintladyidaho.com. Located at 1887 Highland Avenue East in Twin Falls. Hours Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Saturday by appointment only, closed on Sundays. And remember, don't squint, get tint. Did we tell you that they're locally owned and operated, too? You can have a lot of people doing business in certain areas. The local folks who do business with us on a day-to-day basis, they are more, how shall we put it? I had to make a telephone call. Turned out I was calling about a product I bought at a grocery store, and I ended up on some switchboard at Nestle for 40 minutes before I got through to someone to explain what I was calling about. You realize when you're dealing with a local merchant or local business people, you call and you may even get them on the telephone immediately. And they'll be very responsive because they like your repeat business. 9:55, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. A friend of mine sent me this morning. He said, I read this morning that the Fed chair says that we are going to see an interest rate hike coming up perhaps before the end of the year. This was after the Fed decided not to raise rates because they said, well, there's no serious inflation. He said, that's baloney. He says, just last week I did my quarterly bag survey. As many of you know, he writes, this is where I go to the local Walmart and purchase exactly the same goods each time, then compare the cost-to-bag ratio. Up until last week, the cost per bag was about $11 and has remained at that ratio for over 2 years. This last survey revealed that the cost per bag was $13. Mind you, these are exactly the same items purchased every quarter. I've done this survey for about 6 years, he writes. This increase is the largest deviation ever. Ever. And then he gave me a list of the items that he picked up. And these are items that you would buy normally if you were out shopping. And like me, he loves coffee. So I try to buy whatever's on sale. It doesn't really matter the brand. But he ran through all of the things that he needs. And, you know, you're talking about really the staples of life. And he eats a very healthy diet. And he says, mind you, every time the same items and the same grade and the producer of the items are purchased. I do not purchase prepackaged foods in any form, except in my survey, the sauce and the garbanzo beans. What I'm doing here is studying the price of basic materials only. I even take the items received and place them in the same bag size and the same exact items in each bag to remove the possibility that one checkout person will fill a bag differently than another. And he says the largest increases went to chicken, eggs, dairy products. But all of the items showed a relatively large price increase overall. And then he writes this. That, in my opinion, amounts to an inflation rise of 18% on basic materials. The inflation rate that the Fed uses is the estimated inflation rate, minus many core elements, and has little or nothing to do with the price rises that the average person sees over time. And he says if a person has very low income, 18% rise on their basic food items is a biggie. But you know what? You can take care of the 100,000 people that Mr. Obama and John Kerry want to move here. And all of the folks who've come here illegally. And you'll be called a bad person. But don't worry. You know, if you pay 18% or maybe next year it'll be 28% more for groceries, God will love you while you're starving. 9:58. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Hey, have a great weekend. God willing, the creek don't rise. They'll allow me to do this again next Monday morning between 8 and 10 o'clock. Rush Limbaugh following the news from Fox at 10 o'clock. Sean Hannity following Fox News at 1 o'clock. Glenn Beck following Fox News at 4 o'clock. And then following the news at 7 o'clock tonight, Dave Ramsey. All ahead on KLIX.